Welcome to this first video on seeing things we can't see with sound we can't hear. I'm Professor Brian Hoyle, a researcher in electronic sensing. My interest is making industrial processes work better. But the nice thing about working in a university is all the different people you meet with different disciplines. And one time I met a neurophysiologist interested in the brains of people with sensory disabilities. And she asked me an interesting question. She said, "You guys have given us the ability to have a video call with a friend in Australia, but all we have for blind people are sticks and dogs." This was quite a challenge. Let me tell you what happened next.
Well, yes, sticks and dogs is true. We didn't find much evidence of anyone who's thought very carefully about providing technology to help visually impaired and blind people. So we felt that technology should enhance mobility, safety and dignity of visually impaired users, primarily by detecting objects in the path of the user. We're all familiar with the ways in which we can have electronic systems to look around. Radar is an obvious one. It's been used for a very long time. Large, long-range way of looking, but primarily only works with metal objects or very reflective objects that will reflect the radio waves. Lidar is a fairly new invention using laser beams, typically rotating laser beams perhaps. This is great for detecting very solid things, but not for soft materials. It doesn't reflect from things like plastic bags and clothing, etc. So if we look at sonar, sound effectively in air, then most materials will create a reflection from sound. And so that's what we chose to do. Well, looking at sonar, this is just a sound wave really, and sound waves have got frequencies, and the frequency for a fixed speed of sound gives us a particular wavelength. So we've got here some frequencies and their wavelengths. 400 Hertz is a sound that we can all hear. It's a low sound. 4000 Hertz is a little bit more high pitched. 40,000 cycles per second or hertz is a very high frequency sound, and no human being is ever going to hear that sound. And looking at the wavelength is interesting because it tells us about the basic ability to resolve things of a particular size. And so we're looking for a wavelength which is about a centimetre, and that will correspond perhaps to a pole in the way of a user, etc. So something smallish that we can find. Well, if we've chosen sonar, then we're looking to see with echoes, and to make an echo we need to create a pulse of some kind. And to create a pulse, we're going to have to use some ultrasonic waves, which look like the diagram in the upper right there. And we can imagine those sound waves traveling through the air. Now, what we're interested in is a wavelength. We know what that is. It's about 8.5 millimeters, so we know what the length of that in millimeters is, and that's the length of the wave in space. What we want to know is how long that wave takes to transit. If we can work that out, it's the reciprocal of the frequency. 1 divided by 40,000 is a number that you can work out, and then what we want to do is to move to the diagram below and create a pulse. And what we want is a pulse of about 1 millisecond. That's a thousandth of a second. And then we'd like to have 10 of those per second. That will give us a good way to find objects around us. So I'd like to invite you to pause the video at this point and try and do the calculations. If you prefer just to move on and just leave the video running. Well, here are my answers. So 25 microseconds is the period. That's 25 millionths of a second. It sounds a very short time, and that corresponds to a wavelength in space of 8.5 millimeters. You can imagine the wave of sound moving every centimeter or so. There's a little wave there. If we look at the pulse pulsatile behavior that we're interested in, that makes 40 waves per pulse. So for every pulse that we send out, which takes a millisecond, then 40 of those waves fly by. They're moving quite quickly, 340 meters per second. It's about 700 miles an hour, so they're really shifting. And so we're going to do that, and the distance between the pulses in time is 100 milliseconds, so we're getting 10 per second. Well, here we can see a configuration of transducers. We've chosen two. One is going to look upwards and ahead, and the other one is going to look directly ahead. The one shown in red is to protect the user's chest and face, and that is aimed to go to a height just above the highest person we can imagine. And the one going directly ahead is the one that's going to tell the user about the range of an object ahead of him or her. Looking from above in the diagram below, we can see the sort of space is a circular space. It's a circular cone-shaped beam. And the one that's going ahead, as we can see, is going either 2 meters, perhaps adjustable, or 4 meters ahead. Well, here is an actual product. It's called the Ultracane, and we can see the very smart usable handle there, and we can see the two ultrasonic transducers there. One looking forward, shown with a green beam, and one looking upwards for safety with a red beam, and we can see the top of a long cane which the user will use on the street ahead. So we're going to look at this device in use on a very busy street with lots of obstacles. The garbage is just waiting to be collected. Let's see how this user performs. Well, I think you'll agree with me that the user there did a very good job. He didn't bump into anything, and he managed to walk around all the obstacles. He did as well as I would have done, I think. So look out for part 2, when we'll look at the challenge of how we communicate the information from the ultrasonic sensing devices to the user's brain.